I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to Trump Watch, the show that you all know brings you what President Trump has been up to, keeps track of what he's doing so that you don't have to. Well, President Trump is now up to his neck with respect to this tar baby in Iran. You all know that I've been talking about this tar baby for quite some time. It just won't let President Trump go. He would love to get out of Iran. He'd like to come home, maybe use his military forces to invade Cuba, but he just can't. The tar baby has him. But in the early days of the tar baby, he could have broken free if he had just had the will to do it. He could have said, look, okay, we haven't achieved our goals with this war of aggression that we've launched against Iran, Trump, and the national security establishment, along with the Israeli government. No regime change, no destruction of the nuclear processing goals that Iran might have, and no unconditional surrender. Nonetheless, he could have said, we won. We destroyed their third world, hollowed out military, and we're going home. But he didn't do that because Iran started with their blockade, their partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And so, but at that point, Trump could have said, we're out of here. That's not our problem. Or even a little bit later, when the tar baby still didn't have him completely, he could have said, look, this was a bad mistake. I should never have done this. And I acknowledge this was a mistake, and I'm coming home. And just leave the situation there to work its way out on its own. But he didn't do that either. And so now the tar baby has him. They've got troops, more troops that have just been killed over the weekend or the last few days, U.S. troops, some in Jordan, in America's imperial base there, another one in Iraq. I mean, there's still troops in Iraq, but that's part of the empire. And so the Israeli government has figured out that, hey, we don't need to attack the United States. We just attack the imperial bases over here that the U.S. has, and they, of course, wreaked untold damage on the imperial bases out in the Middle East. But now they're killing troops, and needless to say, Trump has gone ballistic. So, now you've killed troops. We're going to have to respond. So now, see, the tar baby has him. I mean, there's just no way he can break free of the tar baby. It is so thick and so all-enveloping that he's done. He's not going to get out of this tar baby. And so now he's ordered massive strikes in Iran, which, of course, brings up the issue of war crimes. Not that war crimes really matter to U.S. officials. But remember, they've already decimated the military. Trump already said that. And that was a foregone conclusion from the very beginning. So when they go on these bombing runs, now they're talking about, out of anger, fury, that U.S. troops have been killed, that the only real targets are over there, the civilian targets, the bridges, the power plants. They knocked out a desalinization plant. And they've been told repeatedly, these are war crimes, or they could be war crimes, because you're now targeting civilians. Does anybody think that matters to these people? I mean, when has it ever mattered? These are the people that still take great pride in the fact that they used nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those are civilian targets. There's no apology there, regret, remorse that, hey, we committed a war crime. And whoever got indicted for a war crime on that, and even before that, they were firebombing Japanese cities. Firebombing. I mean, there's residences and all these little wooden houses were going up in flames. People were dying in mass. Nobody cared. Nobody got indicted for a war crime. Nobody's going to indict the U.S. government or U.S. officials for war crimes. Everybody knows that. Okay. Now you've got Secretary of State Marco Rubio that's threatening to dismantle the International Criminal Court. Okay. Now, the U.S. has no jurisdiction over the International Criminal Court. Why is he even going off in that direction? He wrote this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. but he's going to tear it down brick by brick by brick. Or maybe, he didn't say this, but there's always a possibility of bombing the court. Okay, but why does he care? Well, because even though the U.S. government's not part of the International Criminal Court, that isn't stopping the International Criminal Court from indicting people that are guilty of war crimes. And then there's that concept of extraterritoriality, where some jurisdictions, including, it looks like, the International Criminal Court, are saying, well, even though we don't have formal jurisdiction, we're going to assume jurisdiction. And Rubio goes ballistic over this concept and says, oh, this would take away our sovereignty. They would be indicting our soldiers. Oh, yeah, duh. Because who else is going to hold soldiers to account for war crimes? They're not going to get indicted by the Justice Department. The Congress isn't going to impeach the president for war crimes. The Supreme Court, I mean, you mentioned that this is the president and his national security establishment. Man, they get so nervous they dismiss any case that might even be brought in that direction. So there is no possibility whatsoever that anybody's going to be held liable for war crimes. But Rubio is like launching a preemptive strike against the International Criminal Court, saying, you better not even do this against us, or we'll counterattack against you. Because from what I understand, they've indicted Duterte, the ex-president of the Philippines, for what? For his war crime. I mean, his drug war crimes. He was killing people, or his forces were allegedly killing people, people who had supposedly violated drug laws. Well, that's exactly what the U.S. military is doing in the Caribbean and has been doing in the Caribbean and on the high seas near Latin America. Killing people without any due process of law. Kill them on sight because they're in the little boats. Well, if they're little boats, they must be carrying drugs, Jacob. Well, but that's not the way our criminal justice system is supposed to operate. Under our Constitution, you arrest people and you bring them to justice. And if they have violated some U.S. drug law, even though they're way over there, you put them on trial and you provide due process, trial by jury. They have a lawyer to say, hey, they weren't really violating a U.S. drug law. They were doing whatever. They were fishing or they were shipping drugs to Europe, but had nothing to do with the U.S. They don't give them that opportunity. But nobody's going to be held to account for it. Okay, but I can see they'd be a little bit nervous because it seems to me that that's what Duterte's being indicted and tried for by the International Criminal Court. And I think the International Criminal Court is taking the position that if a country's not doing anything about its criminals or its war criminals, we're going to indict them anyway. And remember what happened to General Pinochet of Chile, who was a favorite of the U.S. national security establishment, the U.S. government, brutal dictator, but killed people there in Chile indiscriminately, including from different countries. And so when he went to England for medical treatment, they took him into custody under a warrant issued by the Spanish government. Now, one might say, well, what's the Spanish government have to do with this? Well, some of their citizens were killed there in Chile. Well, does that give them jurisdiction? I don't think so, but they said it did, and that's the British court took Pinochet into custody and was going to extradite him. I think they did order his extradition to Spain, but at the last minute he got some kind of health reprieve and got sent back to Chile. But I think this is what they're scared of. Now, and I think they should be scared, because if the International Criminal Court does issue an indictment, even though the U.S. is not part of the International Criminal Court and therefore they don't have jurisdiction, it really does put U.S. officials who are indicted under an awkward situation whenever they travel, because they never know when the host country where they're visiting is going to take them into custody and extradite them to the where the International Criminal Court is. I think is in Brussels. So they got to be nervous even after they leave office. Even after he leaves office, Trump has to be nervous about where he goes, where he travels. But again, who's going to bring justice for people that are committing war crimes? But they don't worry about that because nobody's going to hold these people to account like in Iran. It looks like Iran's now reported that they've attacked communities and cities, just like the Japanese bombing the fire bombings in Japan and the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nobody's held to account. Nobody's going to be held to account for what they're now doing in Iran, which is apparently targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure for death and destruction. But this is nothing new. I mean, this is what they've done with the sanctions. Decades of sanctions against the Iranian people, doing their best trying to kill them. Not with a bomb, but through starvation and death by illness. This is what sanctions are all about. I mean, it's so ironic that they've got this blockade against Cuba after decades of the old Cold War racket embargo, economic embargo. And they're saying, well, Cuba is a supporter of terrorism. Are you kidding me? The U.S. is the biggest purveyor of terrorism, and as Martin Luther King pointed out, the biggest purveyor of violence in the world. And that's reflected by the sanctions. Sanctions target the Iranian people and other people around the world, Cubans and so forth, with death. They're trying to kill the Iranian people as a way to effect a regime change in the country. They want them to rise up and go after the Iranian government, oust it from power, and put in another pro-U.S. dictator like Pinochet or like the Shah of Iran. I mean, that's their quest in this thing. But that's the terrorist mindset. Terrorists kill innocent people in a country as a way to tell the regime, if you don't want any more of your innocent civilians to be killed, you better change your policies or change your regime. That's what sanctions, that's what the U.S. does. It's no different. It's state-sponsored terrorism through sanctions and embargoes. And so that's what they've been doing for decades, targeting the Iranian people with death. And so they target them with bombs. What's the difference? Do you see anybody bringing them to account for the sanctions? Of course not. They did it with the Iraqi people too. Remember when they wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein? 11 years. Saddam, he's coming to get us. He's coming to get us. He's got WMDs. And they were killing multitudes of Iraqi people with sanctions. That's state-sponsored terrorism. Remember the infamous words of Madeleine Albright when she said, yeah, the deaths of 500, 500,000 Iraqi children from the sanctions is worth it. I mean, that's brutal. But nobody held U.S. officials to account for that crime. I remember there was a guy named Sachs. Can't remember his first name. Bert Sachs. I think he was from Seattle. He violated their beloved sanctions. He went to Iraq with medicines and food and stuff. Man, they went after him with a vengeance. The Treasury Department did. They fined him $10,000, said that he was a bad person, a traitor for violating sanctions by helping people survive this state-sponsored terrorism on the part of the U.S. government. And Sachs said, to hell with you. I'm not paying your stupid fine. And so he refused to pay the fine. They kept going after him. I think it's for about a decade trying to collect their money. And they never did. To Sachs' everlasting credit. You can Google his name, and I've written a bunch of articles on FFF's website about Sachs. Sachs was heroic, just heroic, because he was doing the right thing, the moral thing, the religious thing, the ethical thing. And U.S. officials were punishing him. But of course, nobody ever got held to account for killing the Iraqi people and those Iraqi children. So it's... Here's what Kenneth Roth, the former executive director of Human Rights Watch, he echoed Iranian officials' condemnation of the U.S. attack on the Southern Water desalination plant on Saturday, saying, quote, "It was not a legitimate military target. It is a war crime to target it." So, okay, what about these soldiers? Well, I've written a blog on Monday. I invite you to read it, saying that they're dying for nothing. I mean, it's just no different from the 58,200 American soldiers who died in the Vietnam War. They died for nothing. Those men were from my generation, and women. There were women that died there too. And they all died for nothing. It was all part of the Cold War racket that you still see going on with Cuba. Oh, that the communists are running Cuba. Oh, this is a grave threat to U.S. national security. Oh my gosh, they're coming to get us, Jacob. This is what the whole Cold War racket was all about. That the Reds were coming to get us, and the Reds were everywhere. And they're even alleging now that Cuba has spies in the U.S. government. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just Cold War redux. I mean, the Cold War was the greatest racket in U.S. history. I mean, there's no question about it. The U.S. national security establishment used it to justify its existence, its conversion to a national security state, ever-growing defense contractors and all. And there were some federal officials that got caught spying for Cuba inside the government, inside the State Department, I think. Maybe a part of the Defense Department too. But they're spying to protect Cuba from acts of U.S. aggression. They're not spying to figure out ways on how we're going to invade the United States and conquer the United States. It's ridiculous. Cuba has never even thought about invading the United States. But their spying was to protect themselves from state-sponsored assassinations. Because remember, the national security establishment does not have to comply with the Bill of Rights. It can kill people without due process of law, contrary to the Bill of Rights. So the CIA entered into a partnership with the Mafia, if you can believe that. The Mafia. I mean, this is the premier criminal organization in the world to assassinate Fidel Castro. And then they have the embargo and they state-sponsored terrorism there, but also real acts of terrorism in Cuba, Operation Mongoose and so forth. And it's never stopped. I mean, they've been on this quest to do regime change in Cuba, which they're right now still trying to do with this blockade, the oil blockade, and I mean, creating untold suffering and misery and death among the Cuban people. But it's all part of the Cold War mindset, the Cold War racket. The Reds are coming to get us. The Reds are coming to get us. When really it's Cuba that has had to be concerned about the U.S. coming to go get them. And which Trump almost certainly would have done if the tar baby in Iran didn't have him tied down there. Because now he's reimposed the blockade. Well, that means the Navy's got to stay there. Okay, remember what I've said in previous sessions. I've said that when you're holding a person down, okay, he can't get up, but neither can you. Because if you get up, they'll get up too. So the Navy's tied down there. They can't come over there and invade. Cuba's the ones that, the Cuban people are really benefiting from this. And U.S. officials have always had this mindset that the Cuban people just love them. They just love them. They're just waiting for an invasion. Are you kidding me? The Cuban people hate the U.S. government. I've been to Cuba. I've talked to people on the streets there. And there's no love lost for the U.S. government. They like the American people. Okay, they draw a distinction. They're able to do something that Americans, by and large, cannot do. The Americans conflate the nation with the U.S. national security establishment, Pentagon, CIA, and NSA. It's all one and the same thing to them, but not for the Cuban people. They draw a distinction, as our founding fathers did. That's why you have the Bill of Rights that protects the nation from the federal government. But Cubans hate the federal government. I mean, the last thing they want is control, like what's happening in Venezuela, where the U.S. government controls a puppet regime there, and that's what the U.S. wants in Cuba, another puppet regime where they order them and they do whatever they're told, and then the U.S. government's effectively running the government, like they are in Venezuela. Now, interestingly enough, there's been, I guess, about at least 3 articles in the New York Times recently describing this bizarre situation where, like you've got these earthquakes that hit, and the socialist government there didn't respond, but it's the U.S. government that's now running the show. They immediately send down 900 U.S. troops to this socialist country, and it still is a socialist country. but it's totally dysfunctional as any socialist country would be. And they still have the sanctions on Venezuela. Get that. The sanctions target the Venezuelan people with death. This is why 7 or 8 million of them left. And some of them came to the United States, as we all know, where they were treated like horse dung. Oh, gotta deport them, Jacob. They're Trinidad with Jacob. They're coming to get me. They have tattoos on their arms, Jacob. Oh my gosh, lock my door, Jacob. The Venezuelans are coming to get me. Well, duh, your sanctions that you support are a principal cause, not just the socialist system. It's like a vice. The two socialists, the socialist U.S. government and the socialist Venezuelan government, it's like a vice, squeezing the Venezuelan people to death. I mean, no wonder 7 or 8 million of them fled in a desperate attempt to survive, but they were treated like horse dung when they got here. Send them back so they can die over there, Jacob. And some of them were sent to El Salvador, as you all know, where they were tortured and really were going to be held forever for doing nothing except fleeing the death by starvation and illness that the U.S. government was inflicting on them with their sanctions. But the New York Times has had some interesting analyses that are really good perspectives on what's going on here. Like there's this Diosdado Cabello. They've got a $25 million reward out for him. U.S. officials do. He's under indictment for drug law violations, just like Maduro. Okay, they captured Maduro and brought him back. He's going to be set for trial. But Cabello, you've got U.S. military officials meeting with him, patting him on the back. Good job, good job. He's the guy that jails people that are protesting. They still got 400 or 500 people still in jail there. They let some of them go, but I mean, this is really bizarre. But most of the mainstream press and most Americans just treated it all normal. Jacob, this is our foreign policy. What do you see as unusual about this? Well, just about everything. It is so friggin' bizarre. Now there was an interesting thing about. Well, let me just emphasize about these soldiers dying for nothing. They died for nothing in Vietnam, but they're dying for nothing here. What are they dying for? They've died. The most recent ones in Iraq and Jordan. These are imperial bases where the troops are stationed at these imperial bases. They died for empire? Okay, well, that's empire is dying for nothing. But make no mistake about it, they're not dying for our freedom. That's what they'll tell the families of the loved ones that, of the people that died and the friends. They'll say, oh, they died for freedom. They're heroic. No, they didn't die for freedom. They died for democracy. No, they didn't die for democracy either. There's no democracy in Jordan or Iraq. And well, they died to make the world safe for democracy. No, they didn't die for that. That was World War I, remember? Or the war to end all wars. No. They're dying for nothing. And the sooner Americans embrace that reality, just like they look at all the ones that died in Afghanistan and Iraq, like Vietnam, they died for nothing. And we just need to accept that reality if we're going to get this country back on the right track. Now, there was an interesting development, though, with Vice President Vance. He went on the Joe Rogan show and said that, that Jeffrey Epstein had some connection, apparently, to Mossad or CIA or some other deep state, whether in America or Israel or another country. And, of course, the mainstream press is going ballistic. Oh, conspiracy theory. Conspiracy. That's what the New York Times says. Why is he engaging in conspiracy theory? They haven't found any document that says that. Well, no, but the circumstantial evidence certainly points in that direction. All right. I mean, look at the plea bargain. I've talked about the plea bargain before, but there has never been in the history of criminal jurisprudence in this country a sweeter plea bargain than what the federal officials gave to Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, they had him dead to rights, with these young women, teenage girls that he was engaged in sexual relations with, and maybe some other more horrific things. But I mean, they easily convicted his girlfriend, gave her a 20-year jail sentence, even though they've got her now in like a country club prison type environment. But they could have easily gotten that conviction, and the U.S. attorney there said, well, we're going to enter into a plea bargain where he gets off scot-free on federal charges. We're going to let the state handle this. So he pleads guilty to some offense in the state, but where they let him leave the jail during the day, he just had to spend the night there. I mean, this is a guy that should have been spending the rest of his life in the penitentiary, federal penitentiary. And it was reported that the U.S. attorney said something like, well, he had heard or learned or whatever. I think he later denied it, that Epstein has connections to intelligence. Not clear what intelligence, but I feel the same way Vance does. Most likely Israeli intelligence, but if that's the case, the Mossad, but if that's the case, they're tied to the hip with the CIA and U.S. intelligence, so it'd be the same thing. I mean, what other explanation for that sweetheart plea bargain? I mean, that's what you call circumstantial evidence pointing toward guilt. And one thing that the Iran war, Trump's war in Iran, has accomplished is that it's distracted attention from all this. I mean, there's no telling what else could have come up if they'd kept digging. But first it was the Venezuela, and y'all remember that I said before the whole Venezuela thing erupted with the Pentagon sending troops over there, is that they were going to start a foreign war to distract attention from the Epstein matter. And this is what James Madison said that the Romans would do. That whenever there was a rebellion domestically over high taxes or inflation or whatever, that the Roman emperors would start a new war against some foreign barbarian or some sort of foreign state, and then everybody would rally around, we got to win, like they're doing with Iran. Okay? I mean, look at all the mainstream press, especially the right-wing mainstream press. We got to win. Oh, this, why don't you do this? And why don't you do a blockade? See, but everything's away from the Epstein matter. Okay? It works. I mean, it's brilliant strategy. I mean, and so here's Vance getting into hot water for stating the obvious. So let's see. Anything? How much time? We've got 3 minutes here. The Venezuelan situation. Let me return to that for a minute. One of these articles in the New York Times said that this is from Time Magazine. Time Magazine. Venezuelan people see no tangible improvement in their appalling living conditions. Okay, so you've got the U.S. has taken over. They oust Maduro, but they don't do a regime change. They keep the socialist regime in power, and they're running the socialist regime with Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president, serving as their puppet. And this guy, Diosdado Cabello, who's under indictment in New York for drug law violations, he's their puppet too. And they're all swearing fealty to the U.S. But they see no tangible improvement in their appalling living conditions. Inflation, blackouts, water scarcity, and police abuse persists at the same levels that preceded the American intervention. Well, duh. When you keep the same regime in power, which is a socialist, communist, narco-terrorist regime, it's all based on central planning. It's based on socialist principles. Why would the results be any different just because Americans are running it? I mean, just because Donald Trump's over there now running the Venezuelan government? It's the system that's the problem, not the people running it. Here's another interesting thing. They still got sanctions against the Venezuelan people. Okay? Sanctions against them. Now, because, well, I don't know why they have sanctions against them, but the Venezuelan people, I'd say about 80% of them, want the ouster of this socialist regime. I mean, they're the ones that really won the last election. But Maduro and his regime, including Delcy Rodriguez, who was vice president, stayed in power because they have the national security establishment. They're a national security state like America's a national security state. They have the power to stay in office regardless of the election results. In other words, they just stole the election and said we're going to stay here in power with all the brutality that comes with being a national security state. And now it's the U.S. that's helping do this. And so the sanctions remain, which is really weird because here they've had a 5,000 person death toll now on these earthquakes. The healthcare system's in shambles and so forth. Why keep sanctions? Why do that against this 80%? Unless maybe they're trying to keep them down so they don't oust the socialist, communist, narco-terrorist regime that the U.S. is now running. The Time magazine article also said her Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello, the head of the state's repressive apparatus, receives American military officers in Caracas, even as Washington maintains a $25 million bounty on his head. I mean, if all this doesn't show the corruption, the deep corruption, the immorality, the evil of the U.S. national security state and its foreign policy of interventionism, I don't know what is. I mean, any reasonable American looking at this ought to say, I don't want to have anything to do with it. This is not what my country is supposed to be all about. And if people would only do that, if there'd be like a crisis of conscience nationwide where people would say, this is not my country, this is not the way I want my country to be, then we could have this great awakening where all of a sudden people say it's time to restore our limited government republic. We should never have converted to a national security state. It's a totalitarian form of governmental structure. It's doing all these brutal, corrupt things like sanctions and partnering with communist totalitarian regimes, targeting innocent people, even in socialist countries, with death by starvation and illness, targeting civilians in Iran, and then there's the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam. I mean, all of a sudden people, if this could be a great awakening and see that the problem just isn't Trump's war on Iran, which many people think that's the real problem. No, the whole problem is the national security state structure that should never have come into existence, and this concept of foreign interventionism, which is a direct contradiction to America's founding foreign policy that lasted some 100 years of non-interventionism. That was reflected by John Quincy Adams' famous speech that you could read online called In Search of Monsters to Destroy. But if we can have that great awakening in this country, and I think it's always possible, especially as the tar baby embroils Trump into even more bizarre acts there in Iran, have a great awakening and get this country back on the right road, the road to freedom and peace and prosperity and harmony with the people of the world. I'm Jacob Hornberger. This is Trump Watch. Thank you all for tuning in. And as always, thank you for your great support of the Future of Freedom Family.